I used to be. I don't know. I just wrote an article that got me in a lot of trouble with a lot of people, but what the hell? Sometimes you just got to write what you had to write. But it basically outlined why I no longer stand with Israel and why I never will stand with Israel again. Um, I used to stand with Israel. I'm admitting it. I bought it in. I bought into it, and there was every reason to buy into it. I worked for the United Nations. It was the United Nations, a vote of the United Nations that created the state of Israel, that set it down, that motion. And Israel's been treated as a sovereign state, a United Nations member ever since. So I'm somebody who has always said Israel has a right to exist. And I never really dug into it too much. I mean, look, I'm not stupid. I've read the history. I watched Exodus, um, you know, and and all that kind of stuff. And I was in Israel from 1994 to 1998. I traveled there all the time, and I worked at the highest levels of Israeli intelligence. I worked with the mensch on the street. I was there when Hamas blew up buses, blew up restaurants. Some of them just a couple hundred yards from where I was. They blew up a discotheque right outside the hotel. I never went in and did the disco thing. I never did disco, and B, I was too old to even consider it. But you could see the young people lining up to go in there, the long lines of people, the Blue Dolphin or something like that it was called, right next to the hotel. Bam, gone. I mean, horrible stuff. So I am not inclined to be supportive of Hamas under any circumstances. I was a big supporter of Yitzhak Rabin. I was a big believer in the two-state solution, and most of the Israelis that I worked with were also in favor of the two-state solution. Almost every Israeli I worked with was dead set against Bibi Netanyahu and the Likud party and their radical approaches to life. But when I left in 1998, we were a couple years after. I think Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in November 1995. Netanyahu was elected prime minister, I think, in March of '96. And so by the time I left, he had been prime minister for 2 years, and he wasn't doing a good job, and everything had changed. But I still was working with the same people who still believed in the same thing. So I carried that with me when I left Israel. This notion that Israel has a right to exist and has a right to defend itself against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, hey, it's an oath I took. Why can't other people have a similar oath? And I also have to, again, I'm just being honest here. Sometimes it's dangerous to be honest, but I'm going to be honest. I was never thrilled by the Palestinian position. I was never thrilled. It wasn't attractive to me because I bought into the Israeli narrative about the creation of their country, surrounded by hostile forces, etc. B, the Palestinian Liberation Organization and its offshoots had done some horrible things against Americans. So I wasn't inclined to give them the time of day. And here I am moving into the whole Iraq war thing, and I'm jumping 2 feet into this anti-war community, almost all of whom are these pro-Palestinian activists who are going over there and this, that, and I'm like, guys, leave the Palestinian issue away. I'm focused on stopping the war in Iraq. The more I started to be critical of the Israeli government, a very easy thing to do because they got us involved in Iraq. I mean, they're behind this. When I left when I went there in 1991 or 1994 for the first time, Israel viewed Iraq and its weapons of mass destruction as the number one threat to their security, which is why they allowed me to come in and talk with them, because they had made a decision that assassinating Saddam wasn't an option. They tried that; it didn't work, and that the trying to contain him was just heading down the wrong path. They wanted these weapons gone, and so I had to convince them that my teams and the other teams were serious about this job, that we were going to go in there and do that. But I also had to convince them that in order to help us do this job better to your satisfaction, you have to open up your intelligence archives to us. We have to know what you know so that you can never slide an envelope underneath the door once we say all the weapons are found and go, no. What about this one, boys? See, we don't want to play that game. If you want the weapons gone, you got to help us make the weapons go. So we need to know everything. So we entered into this extremely close relationship that empowered us to get it to the point. And let me show you how serious they took us. In Um, October 1994, when I first went there, um, the Iraqis had made a move down south, like they were going to go back into Kuwait. I don't know if people can think back to those times, but the U.S. started redeploying Patriot missiles in Iraq. Now Israel went into a panic. They started bringing up their Patriots. And if you go back to 1991, the Gulf War, a lot of the Israelis that died tragically were people who put on gas masks wrong, or they safe proofed their rooms wrong. They put gas masks on children, and the children suffocated because they didn't do it right, because they were panicked about Iraqi chemical weapons coming in. So now the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin is convening a war cabinet, and the head of Israeli military intelligence, Uri Sagai, who was the head of it at that time, had to go in there. And the decision they had to make that day was, do they issue gas masks to the Israeli population? Do they issue gas masks to the Israeli population? And if they did, it was going to be a panic. I mean, Israel would just go into an absolute panic, because it was only a couple years removed from 1991. And so he called me in. He said, look, you're with the UN. I said, yeah. He said, you did the counter Scud thing during the Gulf War. I said, yeah. He said, so what do you think? Does Iraq have Scud missiles? Maybe he knew, because he's Israeli intelligence, so they tend to know everything, but I didn't tell him, is that in November of 1993, I had a meeting in the White House with the director of the CIA and his closest staff, Bruce Riedel, Martin Indyk, people like this, about that very question. And I made the case, based upon the work that we had done as inspectors, that there were no more Scud missiles, that the Scud missile force was gone. We had accounted for all the missiles, or at least we knew that there weren't any operational missiles, and Iraq lacked the capacity to fire missiles against anybody. And the CIA director, he didn't, but Indyk and Riedel said, hey, thanks for that, but let me tell you what's going to happen. We're not going to let you close the book on Iraq's ballistic missiles. Just a finding we'll never accept. The CIA account is that there's 12 to 20 Scud missiles and half a dozen launchers, and that will never change, no matter what you do. No matter what you do as a weapons inspector, that will never change. And that was very disheartening, because it sort of meant that it doesn't matter what we do. And I put a lot of effort into making this happen. I mean, we led teams in, we put our lives on the line, we pushed the envelope, and we answered the gosh darn question.
Oh, I was told to let you know that you can swear.
Well, I don't want to, because my wife will hold me to account, because once I start swearing, all bets are off. But the reason I bring it up so emotionally is that we poured our hearts and soul into this investigation. I mean, we took it seriously. It was the kind of seriousness that says we were willing to die for the outcome, that we were that much committed to what we were doing. And we got the answer. And the CIA said, we're just not going to accept your answer. So now I have this Israeli guy, and this is a life and death. So for the CIA, it was all politics. It was all about politically sustaining a policy of regime change that was linked to continuing economic sanctions, were linked to Iraqi disarmament. They could never allow Iraq to be found to be disarmed, because sanctions would have to be lifted, and that's what they didn't want to happen. So as the silly UN weapons inspectors were disarming Iraq, you couldn't allow that to be told to the world. The Israelis are asking me, and they have not committed to us. They still view us as very skeptical. They're not so sure they want to work with us at this point. He says, do they have missiles? I have to go brief the prime minister. I said, I'll tell you the same thing that I told the director of the CIA. And I went through my math, and I explained it to him, calculations. And he said, and what did the director say? I said, they wouldn't accept my figures. They rejected them. He goes, but what do you believe? I said, I'm telling you right now, with as close to 100% certainty as any man can ever give, there are no Iraqi missiles. Israel's not under threat from any Iraqi missiles. And he sat there, and he left, and that's what he briefed the prime minister, and they didn't put gas masks out on the streets. And so by 1996-7, the Iraqi threat had dropped from number 1 to about number 4. By 1998, it dropped to number 6 on their list, meaning that the Israelis are no longer viewing this as the most existential threat in the world. But then Bibi Netanyahu came in, and he basically found this to be inconvenient. You see, he needed to use all Bibi does is scare people. All he does is scare people. And so he needed to scare people into supporting. See, if Israel's saying, hey, no, Iraq's cool, man, we ain't worried about it. America's got a policy problem. Bibi needs America to back him up on a whole bunch of other issues. So Bibi said, make the Iraqis bad again. And they brought in a guy named Amos Gilad, and he made the Iraqis bad again. And it was the Israeli intelligence. When you ask Congress, because the CIA never made a compelling case because they're just stupid. But it was behind the scenes. It was AIPAC and the Israelis coming in saying, no, we know, they got it. And as soon as the Israelis say, we know, Americans go, they're the best intelligence service in the world. They must know. It must be true. We're going to war. Thousands of American lives. The blood is on Bibi Netanyahu's hands. And so the reason why I brought that up is my attitude towards Israel started to shift. And I started to realize that these aren't good people. They're not on our side. They don't care about me. They don't care about you. All that talk about how Israel and America are tight and friends. If they were that tight, we wouldn't have Jonathan Pollard stealing the crown jewels of American intelligence, giving it to the Israelis, and then the Israelis turn around and give it to the Russians to get favors for. They gave away literally tens of billions of dollars worth of intelligence. When I say tens of billions, I'm talking about the systems that were compromised when Pollard took the crown jewels, gave them to Israel, and then Israel gave it to the Soviets. That was it. It's gone. Now we went black again, and we had to start to recreate things. That takes a long time. That's because of the Israelis, our best friends. And then I'm just watching them. I'm running around trying to stop a war. And everywhere I go in Congress, there's an AIPAC group, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, bird dogging me. So I'd go in, hey, Chuck Hagel, how you doing, man? Talk. Tell them all about what I know about WMD. He's all that. And as I leave, there's the group of AIPAC guys who come in and say, hey, Chuck Hagel, you don't want to be primary next time, do you? Because we'll primary your ass. We got money. We've been giving you money. We'll take the money away. We'll take it out. AIPAC, the Israeli government, has bought the U.S. Congress. End of story. And that became patently clear to me, that the U.S. Congress is singularly responsive to AIPAC and the Israelis. And that irritated me. And so I stopped. I sort of removed the rose lenses from my glasses, and I started to look at Israel again for the first time. In 2009, my wife came over with me in 1995. And while we were there, again, things went boom. I mean, it was an ugly time, guys. Hamas was blowing shit up. I mean, it was bad. But the Israelis would always pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and get on with the business, not of revenge, but of trying to make peace. They knew what Hamas was, and they knew they needed to make peace. They knew that Hamas was trying to disrupt that peace. And so my wife and I fell in love with Israel. I mean, beautiful people, beautiful place. If you're religious, I'm not, she is. I mean, come on, man, the Via Dolorosa, walking down, Jerusalem, looking at the Stations of Christ, dipping your feet in the River Jordan where, John baptized Jesus, looking where Jesus was crucified, looking where he gave his, miracle on the mount. Look at all this stuff. That's just the Christian side. Imagine being Muslim and have the same experiences, or Jewish and having the same experiences. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. How can you not fall in love with it? But, but we went back in 2009, completely different Israel. But she and I were just sitting there going, whoa. First of all, there was a damn wall separating the Israelis from the Palestinians. When I was there before, there wasn't a wall. The green line was just a line on the map. You could see the Palestinian villages. You could see the Palestinians. It was there. You had to be careful when you drove because of the Intifada. But you could see them. They existed. They were here. Now there's a wall. It was a ghetto. They had literally turned all the West Bank into a ghetto, and there was stuff going on behind the walls that was ugly. On the Israeli side, these weren't people who were courageous and brave anymore. These were scared people, frightened, of visceral fear. You could see from the moment we set foot, every Israeli we talked to, they were just scared of everything, paranoid, scared. And we came out of that and we went, that was not a pleasant experience. And we were sort of asking, like, guys, why are you scared? You build a damn wall. This is apartheid. This is the kind of crap that democracies don't do. Why are you doing it? And that was one of those eye-opening moments. And then, 2014 comes along, the bombing of Gaza, the slaughter. All my friends who were in the anti-war movement are, going off and, getting on those ships that are sailing in. And now I got to listen to them. and they're starting to make sense. They're starting to make sense. And then you study, you realize, the role that Netanyahu played in empowering Hamas. And then the bottom line is, I came to the conclusion that while I will never ever condone attacks against civilians, I will never condone the murder of innocent women, children, etc. The kibbutzes that surrounded Gaza are not innocent locations. They're militarized communities. Again, I don't know why people can't see this. They interview this one American Israeli girl, and she just got out of the military. But she talks about, I was assigned to the military, sent to the Gaza division. Her barracks was in a kibbutz. She was billeted in a kibbutz. Her duty assignment as the military was in a kibbutz. That's a military object, guys. I hate to tell you that. It's a military object. And the kibbutz, they had a defense force. The defense force was armed. Several of the kibbutzes mobilized their defense force and repelled the Hamas attacks. Others didn't. Why? Because they got overrun. Stop viewing the kibbutzes as this sleeping group of innocent civilians sitting there at night and the evil terrorists sneak over. They launched a surprise attack. Yes, I admit they launched a surprise attack, and they overran military objectives. And for all those, this is, again, I'm going to get in trouble, but I hate to bring up history, guys. Have you ever heard the city of Caen? Normandy?
Call?
D-Day?
Yeah,
we've
heard of Call.
I'm a Marine. I can say it any way I damn well want to. You call it Con, I'll call it Cain.
Yes, sir.
You're probably right. It's Con.
It's Con. That's why I didn't know what you're talking about. I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about.
I don't know what I'm talking about either. I mean, I just make this shit up. But all right. But just study the battle and the fighting that took place there. The British were supposed to seize it on day one. That was their day one objective. But they couldn't. So they had to go and fight for it. And the Germans ended up putting, I think, 3 panzer divisions into that city, and it was a bad battle. And by the time the battle for Con, right?
Close enough.
Thanks. Ended. There were tens of thousands of French civilians killed. 60,000 French civilians lost their lives in the Normandy campaign. The majority of them lost their lives in Con. That's just the way it is. I mean, we would take a street that was a fortified position. There's French civilians up in their house. They can't escape. They die. We would go in, throw a hand grenade in, or not we, the Brits and the Canadians were doing this, but our allies would go in, clear a room, boom, open it up. Not family of 6. Sorry, so sad, too bad. Wrong place, wrong time. Keep on going, because if you pause and cry, bam, 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 you get killed. Hamas is being actively resisted. This didn't happen like nothing. There's active resistance going on. Israeli forces were surging into the area. They were making contact with Hamas in a variety of places. They oftentimes met Hamas in the kibbutzes that they were fighting for. It's an active war zone. And a lot of people died. And a lot of them were innocent civilians caught in a crossfire. You have to be careful about the propaganda that comes out. I'm not saying that Hamas didn't commit any atrocities. I'm not in a position to know, to be honest. And apparently the Israelis are sitting on a lot of GoPro, is that it? GoPro cameras. Yeah.
Yes, GoPro.
Thank you. And that Hamas were taking, and then they turn around, pop, they get hit. The Israelis capture that. They got the imagery. So, the Israelis, I think, have a lot of images of Hamas fighters turning the corner and shooting people. Now, is that a deliberate act of terrorism, or did they turn the corner, see something move, and fired it because they're assaulting a military position from their standpoint? I'm just saying it's a lot more complicated than the simple act of murder that takes place. So it comes back to the occupiers can never claim self-defense against the occupied. And what happened on October 7th was a prison break by the occupied. And they committed, say what you want about them. And remember, I'm come from the school that says Hamas is a terrorist organization that has a history of blowing up buses and restaurants and places close to me, killing people that were innocent. That was my experience in the 1990s. So I'm not sitting here singing high praises, but I'm just saying that you got to be objective here. This was a military action that they did. They inflicted a serious military defeat on Israel. Israel, after 2020, 2021, had built this giant fence surrounding Gaza. They put up all the technology and they got all the stuff in there to keep the Palestinians on that side inside. That's the whole idea. One of the ways they do it, they have military bases all around. Then they have kibbutzes. The kibbutzes are military installations. Please understand that. They link together to form, they're part of the wall. You have the physical wall, then behind it you have a structure of roads, a line of communication with the actual fortified positions behind which are more towns, more military bases, all designed to keep the prisoners in the prison, keep the inmates in the concentration camp. And on October 7th, Hamas said, stick it where the sun don't shine. We ain't playing that game anymore. We're coming over the wall and we're kicking your ass. And they did. That's what happened. The occupied got sick and tired of the occupier. Israel doesn't have any right to self-defense there. This now, we come back to your peace negotiations. This is why the United States won't allow that issue to be open for discussion, that they have to say straight up that Israel has an inherent right of self-defense we don't want to talk about, because they don't want to talk about the land that kibbutz is on. You know, I wrote an article, and that's article that I mentioned, the reason why I don't stand with Israel anymore. I talked about a eulogy that was read by Moshe Dayan about Roy Rutenberg. He was a former IDF soldier. He was assigned to a kibbutz, imagine that, in Gaza. And then he helped convert the kibbutz to a civilian place. That means you're bringing in the families. But all it is a militarized compound now that's going to be incorporated in the economy. That's what kibbutzes are. But he was the security officer there, and he got killed by Arabs. His body dragged into Gaza. They recovered his body, and they were burying him. But Moshe Dayan's eulogy is telling in a number of ways. One, he says, don't blame them, meaning the Palestinians. He says there's a reason why there's hatred burning in their eyes, because we stole their fathers' lands. This land belonged to their fathers. The land that we're tilling right now belongs to them, and they hate us for that. And we can't blame them for that hatred. But then he said, but blame ourselves, not because we stole the land, but because by stealing the land, we created a process that leads inevitably to conflict with those people. That shame on us for not keeping the sword in our hand to strike them down, to forget about, the maw, the cannon, the weight of Gaza is on our shoulders, and we forgot about that, and it crushed us. His whole point is, we started this. This is the consequence. We have to be realistic about it. Our legacy is perpetual violence with these people who will always hate us. Always hate us. What is Moshe Dayan saying in his eulogy? We are an occupying power. We stole the land of the Palestinians, and they will forever hate us and view us as an occupying power, which is why you can't have a responsible discussion about legitimate self-defense, because an occupier can never claim self-defense against the occupied.